Spring is in the air. It's a good time to be outside, enjoying the cool weather for a change, and to be exercising our bodies. And bending over is one of those things that is done while gardening because we have to work the soil to add amendments and to break up the dense clay soils we have in northern Texas. So I was doing that this weekend, putting in the last of my tomato and hot pepper garden. Uh, Last week I started it, and already the weeds have started growing. So part of what I spent Saturday morning doing was weeding the garden, and the process comes down to identifying what species you don't want in the garden. So it's pretty easy for me this time of year because I'm growing tomatoes and peppers. Everything else is a weed, an unwanted species. And I started thinking about kind of how that relates to what I do for my vocation, for my calling. I'm really trying to identify sources of pain that are causing trouble for a person to use their neck and arms or their back and legs, and eliminate those sources of pain. So sometimes back pain shows up as hip pain or thigh pain. And so the question becomes, is the source of pain really the hip, or is it the low back? And so by a process of asking questions, which is like pulling weeds, I began to take out the things I don't want to arrive at a diagnosis. And sometimes that's a question like, well, are you more uncomfortable sitting, or are you more uncomfortable going upstairs, or are you more troubled bending forward or twisting? So it's that same kind of methodical process that I use to hone down a big group of symptoms to focus then on one body part. And then once I have that one body part, I can go ahead and do additional testing on it. So that's a lot of what I do in my daily process to reach the right diagnosis. So once I've got the diagnosis, then I start applying treatments. So once I have the plants in the ground, I'm then watering them and expecting them to grow and do what plants are supposed to do. Yet tonight, I am noticing, or I noticed this morning, that the plants are wilted over and look pretty tired and sickly, even though they have the right amount of sunlight and pretty good soil preparation and enough water, analogous to being good bone structure on an X-ray, pretty good function on the bending and lifting, but yet something is wrong. So once again, I go through the process of weeding through the different ideas. And I think what I'm having now is transplant shock or transplant stress coming from just taking a seedling, which has either been in my garage under a grow light or I bought at the local nursery, which has been grown in greenhouses, now stressing them into the sunlight and wind. And again, much like neck and back, they can function pretty good if their demands aren't so great. But when people need to start reaching overhead or spending lots of time at the computer looking straight ahead and stressing their neck and upper shoulders and becoming rounded, they start to wilt and have symptoms. So that I've got to, again, going through the methodical way of picking at weeds, I've got to pick through questions to figure out what is stressing you. Why are you failing to thrive? Why are my plants wilting? And so tonight after this video, I'll go out and add vitamin B1 to the soil along with some fungus with the idea of trying to strengthen the root system. In much the same way, I will sometimes apply various medications to people's necks and backs in order to get them into a better condition where their function is improved. And I'll also tell them not to do certain things to aggravate the condition that they have. And if all that doesn't work, which is my plan B, I pull up the plant, and this time I have to go buy a replacement. Same sort of thing is if we do all these things to the disc and it still doesn't function right, then I have to go in surgically, pull out the part, and put a new part in so that the spine can function correctly and the patient doesn't have the back and hip pain or the neck pain going into their shoulder. So this has become my everyday life, whether I do it in the office or I do it out in the dirt, is a series of questions, pulling weeds to try to arrive at a diagnosis and a treatment plan, and then be prepared for the complications. The other thing that kind of struck me this week was watching Artemis as it travels 250,000 miles through space, heading to the dark side of the moon. And this, again, has become the first time human beings have ever seen the dark side of the moon, because, as you may recall, that the moon does not revolve in relation to the Earth. It stays stationary to the Earth. So we humans only ever see one side of the moon, yet the dark side of the moon does have full sunlight when we're not able to see the moon in the sky, and it has partial light when we see a partial portion of the moon. And so I was trying to explain to my 20-something-year-old daughter how this is really a miraculous sense of technology to be able to lift off from the Earth and go out there, much in the same way my career has evolved over the last 30 years. When we were doing neck surgeries, we have braces, external braces, but we didn't have the kind of internal bracing, the technological advancements of metal plates and metal screws and disc replacements. So everybody who had a neck surgery, a big neck surgery, we would drill 4 bolts into their skull and place a ring around their head. It was called a halo, and then attach that to a vest that was worn 24/7 across their torso. And they wore that for 12 weeks to hold their heads still as a form of external bracing. But because of the improvements in metallurgy, we have titanium now, and it's reasonably inexpensive to procure. And because of the understanding of the biology, how the body reacts to metals and medicines, we can go ahead and put these plates and screws in, and people don't wear halos anymore. I've probably drilled holes in people's skull once in the last year. And so explaining to my daughter, who has some interest in medicine, of that technological advancement, just what I've seen in my time, I thought was pretty interesting. She doesn't quite get it. And as an interesting aside, I heard a talk on Sunday morning about how young people, roughly 15 to 20%, think we've never landed on the moon. And I can kind of understand that, growing up in this age of social media, where a lot of what is heard and seen is just pure lies. But what struck me more is that the reason the young people aren't believing about landing on the moon is they probably don't really have studied world history like the rest of us did, and don't understand that this came about because of the space race. And the space race came about because the Russians captured the Eastern German rocket fields at the end of World War II before we did, even though by agreement we were supposed to split them, but that didn't happen. So the Russians were able to put satellites, Sputnik, into orbit, as well as put a dog into orbit before we could even get off the ground. And that led to the space race, which in turn led to the landing on the moon. So there was 15 years of a succession of events that led to the moon landing. And so we all believe that, but those who haven't studied history don't understand it. And that is a parallel also to one of my young colleagues who's never seen a halo brace and never seen holes drilled into the skull, wondering what in the world I'm doing. I said, well, I grew up in the time when we didn't have metal plates and screws. And so everybody went into halo, or for the lower back, we put them in body casts from roughly the nipple level to the top of their hips. And that's what we did on Fridays, is we changed body casts. So again, it's interesting how the technology has evolved, and it's, I think, made life a lot easier for patients.